The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine lawn of the Whitmore estate as 8-year-old Emma pressed her small face against the cool glass of her bedroom window. Her breath fogged the surface as she peered through the ornate iron gates that surrounded the sprawling property. Something felt different today, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. The familiar weight of unease settled in her stomach, the same feeling she'd carried for weeks now. Emma had lived in this mansion for 3 years, ever since the car accident that took her parents. Richard Whitmore, her father's business partner and closest friend, had become her guardian without hesitation. He'd transformed from Uncle Richard, the man who brought her elaborate birthday gifts and told funny stories at dinner parties, into the steady presence who tucked her in at night and helped her with homework at the massive oak dining table. The house itself was a testament to Richard's success in the tech industry. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the manicured gardens, while marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Emma's room was a little girl's dream, painted in soft lavender with a canopy bed draped in white silk. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books Richard bought her and dolls she rarely played with anymore. Despite all the luxury, Emma sometimes felt like she was living in a beautiful museum rather than a home. Richard had tried his best to make the transition easier. He'd hired Mrs. Chen, a kind housekeeper who spoke to Emma in gentle Mandarin and taught her to fold origami cranes. There was also Marcus, the groundskeeper, who let Emma help him plant flowers and told her stories about the different birds that visited their garden. But it was Richard himself who had surprised Emma the most. The man she'd known as her father's serious business partner had revealed a tender side she'd never seen before. He attended every school play, even the ones where Emma forgot her lines. He learned to braid her long brown hair, though his attempts were often lopsided and required Mrs. Chen's gentle corrections. On rainy Saturday mornings, they would sit in his study while he worked, Emma curled up in the leather chair beside his desk with a book, both of them comfortable in their shared silence. Yet despite Richard's efforts and the obvious love he showed her, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It had started about a month ago with small things she couldn't quite explain. A car parked across the street that seemed to appear at different times of day. A man in a dark jacket she'd glimpsed near the school gates. Shadows that moved in her peripheral vision when she played in the garden. Emma had mentioned these observations to Richard once, but he gently dismissed her concerns as an overactive imagination. "You're very observant, sweetheart," he'd said, ruffling her hair. "But sometimes our minds can play tricks on us, especially when we're worried about something." She'd nodded and let the subject drop, but the feeling persisted. Now, as she watched the morning unfold from her window, Emma saw him again. The man in the dark jacket stood partially hidden behind the large oak tree across the street. He wasn't doing anything obviously suspicious, just standing there, but something about his stillness made Emma's skin crawl. She'd learned to trust her instincts over the past 3 years. They'd kept her safe when she'd felt lost and alone, and they were screaming at her now. The man seemed to be watching their house with an intensity that made Emma step back from the window. She counted in her head, a coping mechanism Mrs. Chen had taught her when she felt anxious. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. When she looked again, the man was gone, but the uneasy feeling remained. Emma dressed quickly in her school uniform, a navy blue jumper over a white blouse, and made her way downstairs to the kitchen. The marble stairs felt cold under her bare feet, and she paused to slip on her house slippers before continuing. The kitchen was warm and filled with the aroma of Mrs. Chen's homemade pancakes, a weekly tradition that had become one of Emma's favorite parts of Tuesday mornings. "Good morning, little bird," Mrs. Chen said in her accented English, using the pet name she'd given Emma. "You're up early today." "I couldn't sleep very well," Emma admitted, climbing onto one of the high stools at the kitchen island. The marble surface was cool against her arms as she leaned forward. "Mrs. Chen, have you noticed anything strange lately? Around the house, I mean." Mrs. Chen paused in her pancake flipping, her dark eyes studying Emma's face with the careful attention she gave to everything. "Strange how, little bird?" "I don't know exactly. Just different. Like someone's been watching us." The older woman set down her spatula and moved to stand beside Emma, her hand resting gently on the girl's shoulder. "Sometimes when we lose people we love, our minds try to protect us by being extra careful about everything around us. It's normal to feel like this sometimes." Emma nodded, understanding the logic but not feeling any less concerned. "But what if it's not just my imagination? What if someone really is watching us?" Before Mrs. Chen could respond, Richard's voice echoed from the hallway. "Good morning, ladies. Something smells absolutely wonderful in here." Richard Whitmore entered the kitchen with his usual confident stride, already dressed in one of his perfectly tailored suits. At 42, he maintained the athletic build of his college rowing days, though silver now threaded through his dark hair. His presence filled the room in a way that made Emma feel both protected and slightly intimidated. He built his software company from nothing, turning a small startup into a multinational corporation, and that success showed in everything from his posture to the expensive watch on his wrist. "Morning, Richard," Emma said, accepting the kiss he pressed to the top of her head. Mrs. Chen made pancakes. "My favorite," he said, though Emma knew he rarely ate more than a few bites, usually checking his phone between mouthfuls. "How did you sleep, sweetheart?" Emma hesitated, glancing at Mrs. Chen, who gave her an encouraging nod. "I've been thinking about what I told you before. About feeling like someone's watching the house. I saw the man again this morning." Richard's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flash of something Emma couldn't identify crossing his features before his usual calm demeanor returned. "The man in the dark jacket?" "Yes. He was by the oak tree across the street, just standing there, looking at our house." Richard sat down beside her at the island, his attention fully focused on her for the first time in weeks. "Emma, I want you to tell me exactly what you've been seeing. Everything from the beginning." The serious tone in his voice made Emma sit up straighter. She'd been hoping for this moment, when Richard would finally take her concerns seriously, but now that it was here, she felt nervous about getting the details right. "It started about a month ago," she began carefully. "I first noticed a car that would park across the street. It was different from the cars that usually park there, and it would be there at weird times, like really early in the morning or late at night when I got up to get water." Richard nodded, encouraging her to continue. "Then I started seeing this man. He wears a dark jacket, and he's tall with brown hair. He never does anything bad, but he just watches. Sometimes he's by the tree, sometimes he walks past the house really slowly. Yesterday, I saw him near my school when Mrs. Chen picked me up." The color drained from Richard's face so quickly that Emma stopped talking. His hands, which had been resting casually on the counter, now gripped the marble edge until his knuckles turned white. "Richard," Mrs. Chen asked, her voice filled with concern, "are you all right?" For a long moment, Richard didn't respond. His breathing had become shallow, and Emma could see a muscle twitching in his jaw. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Emma, I need you to go upstairs and pack a bag. Just essentials, enough for a few days." "What's wrong?" Emma asked, fear creeping into her voice. "Who is he? Do you know who's been watching us?" Richard stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. He moved to the window that overlooked the front yard, his body tense as he scanned the street beyond the gates. "Mrs. Chen, please help Emma pack. I need to make some phone calls." "Richard, you're scaring me," Emma said, sliding off her stool. "What's happening?" He turned back to her, and Emma was shocked to see genuine fear in his eyes. Richard, who had faced down corporate rivals and navigated complex business deals with unwavering confidence, looked terrified. "The man you've been seeing," he said slowly, "I think I know who he is. And if I'm right, we need to leave. Now." Emma felt her world tilting off its axis. The safety and security she'd found in this house with Richard suddenly felt as fragile as tissue paper. "Is he dangerous?" Richard knelt down in front of her, his hands resting on her shoulders. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you, Emma. I promise. But we need to be very careful right now. But I don't understand. Who is he? Why is he watching us?" Richard's jaw tightened, and Emma could see him struggling with how much to tell her. "His name is David Morrison. He's your father." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She staggered backward, her mind reeling. "That's impossible. My father died in the car accident with my mother." "You told me they both died." "I know what I told you," Richard said, his voice heavy with regret. "And I'm sorry, Emma. I'm so sorry. But your father didn't die in that accident. He was badly injured, and he's been in prison for the past 3 years." Emma's legs gave out, and she sank onto the kitchen floor, her school uniform pooling around her. The marble was cold against her palms as she tried to process what Richard was telling her. "Prison," she whispered. "Why was he in prison?" Richard ran his hands through his hair, destroying his usually perfect appearance. "The accident wasn't really an accident, Emma. Your father had been drinking, and he was driving too fast. When he crashed the car, your mother died, but he survived. He was charged with vehicular manslaughter." The kitchen spun around Emma as she tried to understand. Her father, the man who used to read her bedtime stories and push her on the swing in their old backyard, was alive. But he was also responsible for her mother's death. I don't understand, she said, her voice small and lost. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you lie? Because I was trying to protect you, Richard said, kneeling beside her on the floor. You were 5 years old, Emma. You just lost your mother, and you were so traumatized you barely spoke for months. The doctors said it would be better for you to have a clean break, to start fresh. I thought if you believed both your parents were gone, you could heal and move on. But he's my father, Emma said, tears streaming down her face. He's my real father. Yes, he is. And I never meant to replace him or make you forget him. I just wanted to give you the best life possible. Mrs. Chin had been standing silently in the corner, but now she moved forward with a box of tissues. She sat down on the floor beside Emma, wrapping her arms around the sobbing girl. Little bird, she said softly, this is very hard news. But Richard loves you very much. He's been taking care of you because he wants to keep you safe. Emma looked up at Richard through her tears. If he's out of prison now, does that mean he wants me back? Richard's expression darkened. Emma, your father served his sentence, but he's not the same man he was before. Prison changes people, and not always for the better. The fact that he's been watching the house instead of coming to the door tells me he's not thinking clearly. Maybe he's just scared, Emma said, surprising herself with the defense of a man she barely remembered. Maybe he doesn't know how to talk to me. Maybe, Richard conceded, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. But we can't take that chance. If he wanted to reconnect with you properly, he would have gone through the legal system. He would have contacted me or your social worker. The fact that he's been stalking us suggests his intentions might not be good. Emma wiped her nose with the tissue Mrs. Chin had given her. What if he just wants to see me? What if he's been trying to work up the courage to knock on the door? Richard stood and began pacing the kitchen, his phone already in his hand. Emma, I know this is confusing and scary, but I need you to trust me. Your father has been out of prison for 6 weeks. In that time, he could have contacted us through proper channels. Instead, he's been watching you, following you. That's not normal behavior. 6 weeks? Emma asked. But I've only been seeing him for a month. Which means he spent 2 weeks finding us before he started his surveillance, Richard said grimly. That's not the behavior of someone who just wants to reconnect with his daughter. That's the behavior of someone who's planning something. Emma's mind raced as she tried to process everything. The father she'd mourned for 3 years was alive, but he might also be dangerous. The man who'd raised her and loved her had been lying to her, but he'd done it to protect her. Nothing made sense anymore. I need to call my security team, Richard said, already dialing. And my lawyer. Emma, I want you to go upstairs with Mrs. Chin and pack that bag. We're going to stay at the safe house until we can figure out what to do. Safe house? Emma asked, a new wave of fear washing over her. It's just a precaution, Richard said, but Emma could hear the tension in his voice. I have a small apartment downtown that's registered under a different name. We'll stay there while I hire some private investigators to find out what your father wants. Emma stood up slowly, her legs still shaky. Richard, what if he just wants to apologize? What if he wants to tell me he's sorry about what happened to Mom? Richard paused in his dialing, his expression softening. Sweetheart, I understand why you want to believe that. But even if that's true, he's going about it the wrong way. A man who's truly sorry doesn't stalk his daughter. He doesn't hide in shadows and watch her from a distance. He gets help, he goes through the proper channels, and he respects the life she's built without him. The logic was sound, but Emma's heart ached with the possibility that her real father was so close. She'd spent 3 years believing he was dead, and now she was being told he was not only alive but potentially dangerous. What if we're wrong about him? She asked quietly. Richard knelt down in front of her again, taking her hands in his. Emma, I promise you this. If your father truly wants to be part of your life, and if he's willing to do it the right way, I won't stand in his way. But right now, his behavior is scaring me, and my job is to keep you safe. Can you understand that? Emma nodded, though her heart felt like it was breaking. Will I ever get to talk to him? I don't know, Richard said honestly. But I promise we'll figure this out together, okay? As Emma headed upstairs with Mrs. Chin, her mind churned with questions and emotions she didn't know how to handle. The man watching their house wasn't just a stranger anymore. He was her father, the man who'd given her life but also taken her mother's. He was a ghost made flesh, a possibility and a threat rolled into one. In her room, Emma mechanically packed clothes into her small suitcase while Mrs. Chin gathered her toiletries. The familiar space that had been her sanctuary for 3 years now felt different, tainted by the knowledge that her father had been watching her through these very windows. Mrs. Chin, Emma said as she folded her favorite pajamas, do you think Richard is right to be scared? The older woman paused in her packing, considering the question carefully. I think Richard loves you very much, and when people love someone, they sometimes see danger where there might not be any. But I also think he's a smart man who knows about these things better than we do. I wish I could remember my father better, Emma admitted. I have some pictures, but I can barely remember what his voice sounded like. Sometimes our hearts remember things our minds forget, Mrs. Chen said gently. But little bird, the man who has been your father for 3 years is downstairs, worried sick about you. That love is real, even if it's different from the love you were born with. Emma nodded, understanding the wisdom in Mrs. Chen's words, but still feeling torn. As she zipped up her suitcase, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. She looked pale and scared, younger than her 8 years. The confident little girl who'd been thriving in Richard's care had been replaced by a frightened child who didn't know who to trust or what to believe. Downstairs, Richard was speaking in hushed, urgent tones on his phone. Emma could hear fragments of the conversation as she and Mrs. Chen descended the stairs. I need a full background check on David Morrison, released from Millfield Correctional 6 weeks ago. Yes, I'll pay for expedited service. No, we can't wait until tomorrow. When he saw Emma, Richard ended his call quickly. Are you ready, sweetheart? Emma nodded, though she felt anything but ready. Richard, what if he tries to follow us? That's why we're taking precautions, Richard said, lifting her suitcase. Marcus is going to drive us in his truck instead of my car, and we're going to leave through the back gate. Mrs. Chen is going to stay here and keep an eye on things. I don't want to leave Mrs. Chen alone, Emma said, suddenly panicked at the thought of splitting up their small family. I'll be fine, little bird, Mrs. Chen assured her. Marcus will check on me, and I have the security system. You need to go with Richard and stay safe. As they prepared to leave, Emma took one last look around the kitchen where she'd eaten countless meals and done homework at the island. The house that had become her home now felt like a place she might never see again. Emma, Richard said softly, I know this is scary and confusing. I know you have questions about your father, and I promise we'll talk about all of it when we're somewhere safe. But right now, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Emma looked up at the man who'd been her anchor for 3 years. Despite the lies he'd told her, despite the confusion and fear swirling in her chest, she could see the love and desperation in his eyes. He was terrified, not for himself but for her. I trust you, she said, meaning it despite everything. Richard's relief was visible as he squeezed her hand. Thank you, sweetheart. We're going to get through this together. As they made their way to the back of the house where Marcus waited with his pickup truck, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She resisted the urge to look back at the oak tree across the street, but she could feel eyes on her as surely as she could feel the morning sun on her face. The drive to the safe house was tense and silent. Emma sat between Richard and Marcus in the front seat of the truck, watching the familiar neighborhoods of her life disappear behind them. Richard kept checking the mirrors, his jaw tight with concentration, while Marcus navigated through back streets Emma had never seen before. No one's following us, Marcus said after about 20 minutes. I've been watching. Richard nodded but didn't relax. Take the long way anyway. I want to be sure. Emma stared out the window at the passing city, her mind still reeling from the morning's revelations. Somewhere out there, her biological father was looking for her. The man she believed was dead for 3 years was alive, and according to Richard, he might be dangerous. But what if Richard was wrong? What if her father just wanted to see her, to explain what had happened, to try to rebuild the relationship they'd lost? The safe house turned out to be a modest apartment in a nondescript building downtown. It was nothing like the mansion Emma was used to, with its small rooms and basic furniture. But it felt secure, with deadbolts on the door and windows that didn't face the street. I know it's not much, Richard said as he set down their bags, but it's safe. No one knows about this place except Marcus and my lawyer. Emma sat on the simple couch and looked around the sparse living room. How long do we have to stay here? I don't know yet, Richard admitted. I've hired a private investigator to find out what your father wants and whether he poses a real threat. Depending on what we learn, we might need to get a restraining order or involve the police. The police? Emma asked, alarmed. Only if necessary, Richard said quickly. Emma, I know this is hard to understand, but your father's behavior is concerning. Watching someone's house, following them, these are things that stalkers do. Even if he is your biological father, that doesn't give him the right to frighten you. Emma curled up on the couch, pulling a throw pillow against her chest. I just don't understand why he didn't try to contact us properly. If he wanted to see me, why didn't he just call or write a letter? Richard sat down beside her, his expression thoughtful. That's a good question. and it's one of the things that worries me. A man who's genuinely remorseful and wants to reconnect with his daughter would go through the proper channels. He'd contact a lawyer or a social worker. He'd respect the fact that you've built a new life. Maybe he's scared, Emma said again, clinging to the hope that her father's intentions were good. Maybe he doesn't know how to approach us. Maybe, Richard conceded. But Emma, even if fear is motivating his behavior, that doesn't make it acceptable. And it doesn't mean it's safe for you to be around him. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. Finally, she asked the question that had been weighing on her heart. Richard, do you think my father loves me? The question seemed to catch Richard off guard. He was quiet for a long time before answering. I think your father probably does love you in his own way. But Emma, love isn't always enough. Sometimes people who love us can still hurt us, especially if they're not thinking clearly or if they're dealing with their own problems. Like how he hurt my mom even though he loved her? Richard's face tightened with pain. Yes, sweetheart. Like that. Emma felt tears threatening again. The simple world she'd known that morning, where Richard was her guardian and her parents were both dead, had been shattered. Now she was living in a reality where her father was alive but potentially dangerous, where the man who'd raised her had been lying to protect her, and where she didn't know who to trust or what to believe. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Richard pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. I know you are, sweetheart. I'm scared too. But we're going to figure this out together, okay? I'm not going to let anything happen to you. As Emma buried her face against Richard's shoulder, she tried to find comfort in his familiar scent and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. But even in his arms, she couldn't shake the feeling that her world had fundamentally changed. The father she'd mourned was alive, and the life she'd built was now in danger. Outside the safe house windows, the city continued its normal rhythm, unaware that a little girl's world had been turned upside down by the revelation that the dead could come back to life, and that sometimes the people who were supposed to love you the most were the ones you had to fear. The rest of the day passed in a blur of phone calls and hushed conversations. Richard spent hours on the phone with his lawyer, his private investigator, and his security team, while Emma tried to distract herself with books and the small television in the apartment. But she couldn't concentrate on anything. Her mind kept drifting to the man in the dark jacket, trying to reconcile the shadowy figure she'd been seeing with the father she barely remembered. That evening, as they sat down to a dinner of takeout Chinese food, Richard's phone rang. Emma watched his face carefully as he answered, seeing his expression grow increasingly grim. I understand, he said into the phone. Yes, I want you to keep watching him. No, don't approach him yet. Just observe and report back. When he hung up, Emma could see the tension in his shoulders. What did they find out? Richard set down his chopsticks and looked at her seriously. The private investigator located your father. He's been staying at a motel about 10 miles from our house. He's been there for 6 weeks, which confirms what we suspected about the timeline. What else? Emma asked, sensing there was more. He's been asking questions about you. About your school, your schedule, your activities. He's been trying to learn everything about your life. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. That doesn't sound like someone who just wants to say hello. No, it doesn't, Richard agreed. Emma, I want you to understand something. Even if your father's intentions aren't malicious, his behavior is obsessive. He's been studying your life like he's planning something, and that's not normal. Emma pushed her food around on her plate, her appetite gone. What are we going to do? Tomorrow, I'm going to have my lawyer file for a restraining order. It will legally prevent your father from coming near you or the house. But what if he ignores it? Then we involve the police, Richard said firmly. Emma, I know this is hard, but your safety is more important than anything else. More important than his feelings, more important than his rights as your biological father. Emma nodded, understanding the logic, but feeling a deep sadness about the whole situation. Richard, can I ask you something? Of course. When you decided to take care of me after the accident, did you think about what would happen if my father got out of prison? Richard was quiet for a long moment, his expression troubled. Honestly, I hoped he would serve his full sentence and that by the time he got out, you'd be old enough to make your own decisions about whether you wanted a relationship with him. I never imagined he'd be released early or that he'd behave like this. Do you regret taking me in? The question seemed to shock Richard. Emma, no, never. Taking care of you has been the most important thing I've ever done. You've brought more joy and meaning to my life than I ever thought possible. Even though it's complicated now? Especially because it's complicated now, Richard said firmly. Emma, you're my daughter in every way that matters. I've been there for your nightmares and your triumphs, your scraped knees, and your school plays. I've watched you grow and learn and become this amazing little person. That bond isn't diminished by the fact that your biological father is alive. Emma felt tears welling up again. But he's my real father. He's your biological father, Richard corrected gently. But being a real father is about more than genetics. It's about showing up every day, making sacrifices, putting your child's needs before your own. I've been your real father for 3 years, Emma. That doesn't change just because David Morrison is out of prison. The conversation was interrupted by Richard's phone ringing again. This time, his face went pale as he listened to whoever was on the other end. When? He asked sharply. How long ago? Okay, keep watching but don't engage. I'm calling the police. Emma's heart started racing as Richard hung up and immediately dialed another number. What's wrong? Your father left his motel an hour ago, Richard said as he waited for someone to answer his call. He's driving toward our neighborhood. Emma felt sick to her stomach. Is he going to the house? I don't know, but I'm not taking any chances. Yes, this is Richard Whitmore, he said into the phone. I need to report a potential stalking situation. My address is 1247 Elm Ridge Drive. Yes, I'll hold. As Richard spoke to the police dispatcher, Emma curled up on the couch and tried to process what was happening. Her father, the man she'd been seeing from her bedroom window, was actively looking for her right now. The thought was both terrifying and heartbreaking. The police are sending a patrol car to the house, Richard said after ending his call. If your father shows up there, they'll intercept him. What if he doesn't go to the house? What if he's looking for us? He doesn't know about this place, Richard said, but Emma could hear the uncertainty in his voice. And even if he did, this building has good security. Emma wasn't reassured. Richard, what if we're wrong about him? What if he's not dangerous and we're just making everything worse? Richard sat down beside her and took her hands in his. Emma, I understand why you want to believe the best about your father. But his behavior over the past month has been that of someone who's not thinking clearly. Even if his intentions are good, his actions are frightening. But what if he just wants to explain what happened? What if he wants to apologize? Then he should have contacted us through proper channels, Richard said firmly. Emma, imagine if a stranger had been watching your house and following you to school. How would you feel about that? Emma considered this. I'd be scared. Exactly. The fact that this person happens to be your biological father doesn't make his behavior any less frightening. If anything, it makes it more concerning because he has an emotional connection to you that could drive him to do things a stranger might not do. Emma felt trapped between her longing to see her father and her fear of what he might do. I just wish I could understand why he's doing this. So do I, Richard said softly. And maybe someday we'll get those answers. But right now, our priority has to be keeping you safe. They spent the rest of the evening in tense silence, both jumping every time a car passed by outside or footsteps echoed in the hallway. Richard's phone rang several more times with updates from his security team and the police, but there was no sign of David Morrison at the house. As bedtime approached, Emma realized she'd never felt so confused and frightened in her life. The man who'd been her father for 3 years was doing everything he could to protect her from the man who'd given her life. Both men claimed to love her, but their definitions of love seemed to be pulling her in opposite directions. Richard, she said as he tucked her into the small bed in the apartment's spare room. What if my father tries to take me away? Richard's jaw tightened. That's not going to happen, Emma. I'm your legal guardian, and I won't let anyone hurt you or take you away from the life you've built. But what if he has rights? What if the court says he can see me? Then we'll deal with that when it happens, Richard said. But Emma, even if a court were to grant your father visitation rights, it would be supervised visitation in a controlled environment. No judge would allow an ex-convict who's been stalking his daughter to have unsupervised access to her. Emma nodded, trying to find comfort in Richard's words. But as she lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the city outside, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was spiraling out of control. The father she'd mourned was alive but potentially dangerous. The father who'd raised her was terrified and defensive. And she was caught in the middle, an 8-year-old girl who just wanted to feel safe and loved. As sleep finally began to claim her, Emma's last conscious thought was a prayer that somehow, someway, this nightmare would end with everyone she loved being safe and happy. But deep in her heart, she suspected that some stories didn't have happy endings, and that sometimes the people who were supposed to protect you were the ones who ended up hurting you the most. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Richard's phone rang early, waking Emma from a restless sleep filled with dreams of shadowy figures and car crashes. She could hear him speaking in low, urgent tones in the living room, and something in his voice made her stomach clench with dread. When she emerged from the bedroom, Richard was sitting on the couch with his head in his hands. His hair was disheveled, and he looked like he'd aged years overnight. "What's wrong?" Emma asked, her voice small and scared. Richard looked up at her, and Emma was shocked to see tears in his eyes. "Emma, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be very hard to hear." Emma's legs felt weak as she sat down beside him. "Is it about my father?" "Yes," Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The police found him last night. He was in his car, parked outside your school." "Emma, he had detailed plans of the building, your class schedule, and information about your daily routine. He also had other things that suggest he was planning to take you." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. "Take me? You mean kidnap me?" Richard nodded, his face etched with pain. "The police found rope, duct tape, and a detailed plan for how he was going to approach you when you were alone. Emma, your father wasn't trying to reconnect with you. He was planning to abduct you." Emma felt the world spinning around her. The father she'd been defending, the man she'd hoped just wanted to apologize and rebuild their relationship, had been planning to kidnap her. All of Richard's fears had been justified, and her own instincts about feeling watched and unsafe had been absolutely correct. "Where is he now?" she asked weakly. "He's been arrested," Richard said. "He's being charged with stalking, attempted kidnapping, and violating the terms of his parole. He's going back to prison, Emma. For a very long time." Emma burst into tears, not from sadness, but from a complex mixture of relief, fear, and grief. Relief that the threat was over, fear about what could have happened, and grief for the father she'd hoped to have but who had never really existed. Richard pulled her into his arms, holding her as she sobbed against his chest. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm sorry you had to go through this. I'm sorry your father turned out to be someone who would hurt you instead of love you. I wanted him to be good," Emma cried. "I wanted him to just miss me and want to be my dad again." "I know you did," Richard said, his own voice thick with emotion. "And it's okay to grieve for the father you wanted him to be. It's okay to be sad that he couldn't be the man you needed him to be." They held each other for a long time, both crying for different reasons but sharing the same relief that the nightmare was over. Emma cried for the loss of a dream she barely allowed herself to have, while Richard cried from the terror of almost losing the little girl who'd become the center of his world. "Richard," Emma said when her tears finally subsided, "I'm sorry I didn't trust you completely. I'm sorry I kept hoping he was good when you were trying to protect me." "You have nothing to apologize for," Richard said firmly. "You were hoping for the best in someone you wanted to love. That's not wrong, Emma. That's human. And it's one of the things I love most about you." "What happens now?" Emma asked. "Now we go home," Richard said. "We go back to our life, and we try to heal from this. Your father can't hurt you anymore, Emma. He's going to be in prison for a very long time, and when he gets out, there will be legal protections in place to keep him away from you." Emma nodded, feeling a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. "Can we go home today?" "Yes," Richard said, smiling for the first time in days. "Mrs. Chin is making your favorite dinner, and Marcus has been worried sick about you. Everyone's ready for you to come home." As they packed up their few belongings from the safe house, Emma reflected on everything that had happened. Her world had been turned upside down, but in the end, the people who truly loved her had protected her. Richard, Mrs. Chin, and Marcus had formed a family around her that was based on choice and commitment rather than just biology. "Richard," she said as they prepared to leave, "I want you to know that you're my real father. Not just my guardian or my father figure. You're my dad." Richard stopped what he was doing and looked at her with such love and gratitude that Emma felt her heart swell. "And you're my daughter, Emma. In every way that matters, you're my daughter." The drive home was different from their frantic escape 2 days earlier. This time, they took the direct route, and Richard played Emma's favorite music on the radio. The sun was shining, and the familiar neighborhoods looked welcoming rather than threatening. When they pulled into the driveway of the mansion, Emma felt a sense of coming home that was deeper than she'd ever experienced before. This house, these people, this life they'd built together, was her real family. Not because of genetics or legal documents, but because of love and commitment and the daily choice to show up for each other. Mrs. Chin was waiting at the front door, her face bright with relief and joy. She swept Emma into her arms, speaking rapidly in Mandarin before switching to English. "Little bird, I was so worried about you. Are you all right? Are you hurt?" "I'm okay, Mrs. Chin," Emma said, meaning it for the first time in days. "I'm really okay." Marcus appeared from around the side of the house, his weathered face creased with concern. "Emma, girl, You gave us quite a scare. Everything all right now? Everything's all right, Richard said, his arm around Emma's shoulders. The threat is over. We're all safe. That evening, as they sat around the kitchen island eating Mrs. Chin's homemade lasagna, Emma felt a peace she hadn't experienced in weeks. The familiar sounds of home, the warmth of the kitchen, the easy conversation between the people who loved her, all combined to create a sense of safety and belonging that no biological connection could match. Mrs. Chin, Emma said as she helped clear the dishes, I want to learn more Mandarin. Will you teach me? Of course, little bird. We'll start tomorrow. And Marcus, can you show me how to plant the winter flowers you were talking about? Absolutely, Emma. We'll start this weekend. As Emma got ready for bed that night, she looked around her room with new eyes. This was her sanctuary, her safe place, her home. The man who'd been watching her from the shadows was gone, and the people who truly loved her were here, surrounding her with warmth and security. Richard came in to say goodnight, as he had every night for 3 years. But tonight felt different, more significant somehow. Richard, Emma said as he sat on the edge of her bed, I love you. Thank you for protecting me, even when I didn't understand why you were scared. I love you too, sweetheart, Richard said, brushing her hair back from her face. And I want you to know that you're safe now. You're home, you're loved, and you're safe. As Emma drifted off to sleep, she thought about the difference between the father she'd lost and the father she'd found. David Morrison had given her life, but Richard Whitmore had given her a life worth living. One was biology, the other was choice. One was a genetic connection, the other was a bond forged through shared experiences, daily care, and unconditional love. The man who'd been watching their house was gone, but the man who'd been watching over her heart was still there, and always would be. Emma fell asleep feeling truly safe for the first time in weeks, surrounded by the love of the family she'd chosen and who had chosen her in return. In the end, she realized family wasn't about who gave you life, but about who made your life worth living. And in Richard, Mrs. Chin, and Marcus, she'd found a family that would never let her down, never frighten her, and never make her question whether she was truly loved. The nightmare was over, and Emma was finally, truly home.